friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Said Forest. How are you? How you doing this week? It's been a wild one. I mean, lots of changes on the COVID front, of course, and here in Idaho, at least, it's been really smoky. There's fires all around us, and everything's kind of blowing in this northeasterly direction, which is intense. It feels like the world is drastically changing, and it's asking us to change along with it, but that's sort of something we often do, kicking and screaming. But one way we can help facilitate times of change is in various forms of wellness and therapy, psychedelic work, insight, meditation, so forth and so on. And I have a conversation this week with Erica Zelfand. She's a family physician specializing in integrative and functional medicine. And so she does natural therapies, conventional medicine, as well as doing forms of psychedelic, like resource education and consultations. So she does that virtually and in person. And I learned about her from our friend Ed Hallman, who runs a business in Portland, Oregon called 1201 Computer Repair. And I met Ed years back. When I was living in Portland, I was rehearsing once, and I was on the ground fiddling with my looper pedal, and I stood up and my head hit my Nord keyboard, and the whole thing crashed to the ground. The keyboard landed its corner on my laptop on the ground and totally smashed it apart. And I was emailing around places to find it to get fixed, and I saw that place, 1201. And I just emailed them saying, what's up? And Ed wrote me back and he's saying, yeah, we could fix that. And I see your email address. It says eastforest.org. If this is East Forest, I'd love to do it at cost, because I just want to say thank you, giving back for the music you've given me. So that was like an amazing synchronicity. And he did help me out, and he has helped me out since. So here he is helping out again, because he introduced us, myself and Erica, and got this conversation started. So if you need a computer repair and you're in Portland, or you want a virtual help or repairs, they do that as well. Check them out. But before we get into this conversation, I just want to say we did just add a couple live dates, if you can believe it or not. I know this is like a strange time to be announcing live dates with the Delta variant going around, but we actually had been trying to reschedule the Salt Lake date that had been moved previously from being shut down by the county because they took over the venue, and we finally did get another option for a place to play, and then we threw in Denver because we actually found a spot to do it there as well. This was before Delta, but we're moving forward as best we can. There is a COVID policy for those events that's becoming kind of standard. Right now it is proof of a negative test or a vaccination to attend. And of course, we have to comply with whatever's going on locally on the ground with any guidelines or rules. But so far, we can move forward with those events. So that'll be September 14th in Denver, Colorado at Asterix, and September 16th in Salt Lake City at the Union Event Center. If you'd like to get tickets or learn more info about any of that stuff, you can do so at eastforest.org/tour. And you'll also see about the Treefort Music Festival. That's the weekend of September 23rd. I'm playing on Saturday night, and I'm also playing that morning, September 25th, Saturday, as part of the Yoga Fort with my lovely lady, Marissa Rada-Wepner, and they do all sorts of fun things like that. So we are working on other dates, both in 2021 and 2022 in very select places, limited capacity for all of these. So if you are interested, do it soon. But the best way to know about this would be to get on the newsletter, which you can do also at eastforest.org. And thank you for the reviews of the podcast, and thank you to our council members on the Patreon. Everyone at eastforest.org, you can scroll down there and learn about our council on Patreon, which is where we share unreleased music, and sometimes I do lives and Q&As, and we have our monthly council. And it's just a way to support this podcast if you'd like to find a way to do that for as little as $4 a month. It's a way to say thanks and just give back. It's like a cup of coffee or something. So thanks for everybody who is able to do that. That's about it for now. I could tell you other things, but I gibber and jabber too much. Let's get into more of a conversation with our new friend, Erica Zelfand. All right, Erica Zelfand, thank you so much for joining us. We were chatting, we had to restart, but so we'll pretend like our flow, it starts right now, but it does. You were telling us a bit about who you are and what you do, and but I do want to give a shout out to Eddie Hallman, who brought us together. We were talking about our stories of how we got to know him, and those may or may not be part of this. If I can grab that recording, I want to include it, but if not, shout out to Ed. So you
1201 computer repair.
There we go. They're seriously.
Good things happen when bad things happen.
Wow, that could be their new. That could actually be a really good motto. Okay, so tell us again a bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so who I am, I'm a family physician. I specialize in integrative and functional medicine. I graduated from one of only 6 naturopathic medical schools in the country, and it became really clear after I opened my practice that the mental health epidemic is very much upon us, and that the tools we have, although helpful, are not enough. We needed more tools. And that led me to learn more about integrative mental health, which invariably led me to the world of psychedelics. And as I learned more about psychedelics, I realized, wow, the medical community really needs to know more about this. And there's this lag time in medicine of 17 years between when the research shows something and when that evidence-based medicine makes its way into the average practitioner's prescription
17
practice.
years? That sounds very precise.
Yes,
okay.
There was a study, and that was, the estimate. And I thought, when it comes to mental health, we don't have 17 years. And psychedelics are not new. We talk about, the psychedelic renaissance, and it's like, it's not really, it's been here all the time. It's just people are talking about it more. And I thought, well, let's try and speed that up a little bit if we can. And so I started lecturing on the clinical applications of psychedelic medicine and presenting trainings and continuing education presentations to my fellow colleagues in the medical profession. And then that sort of bled into anyone that wanted to learn about psychedelics. And then the next thing I knew, I was getting on airplanes and traveling around the world because I realized I couldn't wait 17 years or however long it's going to be for legalization. And I need to start treating people now. So I traveled to parts of the world where I can do that. And so I can now say I'm a psychedelic facilitator as well. And when I'm on the US soil, I can work with ketamine legally. And that's what I do with folks here in the States.
Oh, so you're doing ketamine assisted therapy as part of your practice now?
Yep, that's right.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's interesting about this lag that you're talking about. And there's definitely, I think, as people are becoming a more above ground, so to speak, with their participation and interest. And I'm just curious, like, if you're out there talking about it, like, tell us a bit about like what your background is. Where's the information coming from that you're sharing? Is it from firsthand experience or something else? Or I'm assuming this wasn't taught in naturopathic school.
No, this is not taught in any medical school. Ibogaine was mentioned, I think, once in my training, actually in an immunology course, not even, anything pertaining specifically to mental health. So most of the training that I've undergone, it's been a combination of self-study, of digging into PubMed and reading the scientific literature there, reading books, attending conferences. I also did some training through MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, their MDMA-assisted therapy training, and connecting with like-minded individuals. But then there comes a certain point where you can only learn so much from reading, and it comes time to, actually do the work yourself and or do the work with others. And so my own personal growth and development has happened alongside my academic growth and development. And I have been able, as a result, to more meaningfully help people, to help my patients and help my clients, and to help other practitioners help their patients and their clients more effectively. And so I'll just say one more thing, part of how I've done that is my pandemic project was to take my day-long training that I had for healthcare providers, that anyone is welcome to come to. And actually our mutual friend Eddie came to my training. and I turned it into an online course. So practitioners and just regular folks who want to know how psychedelics work and what they actually do, and how to use them responsibly, can from anywhere in the world now take my online course, which is called The Science of Psychedelics.
It's kind of crazy that, the idea that, let's say you're going to be a psychotherapist or any kind of facilitator or medical professional that's working in the space of psychedelic assisted therapy, and there's this large component of it that's undeniable, that is psychological, spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that it's almost poo-pooed, or it's still like in any other medical setting, it's like, well, if you try the drugs yourself, oh my God, that's not what you do in the studies, or that's now, you've crossed a red line. And I almost feel like it should be a prerequisite for to do this kind of work. It's like, if you haven't plumbed the depths on some level psychologically, it's sort of like, how can you know? Any therapist I've ever worked with, I always ask them, I said, look, you don't have to, on a personal level, have you had any experience with psychedelic states? Because it's kind of like the things I want to talk about relate to an expansion of the human experience and a depth to it that in some ways it's hard to access those expanded states in other forms. It can be done, but it's rare, most people. So sort of like, how do you relate? And so if you're designing, like, how do you weave that in when you're trying to talk to providers and people who want to bring this into their practice? Or I'm assuming that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, it's tricky because healthcare providers are really held to a different standard than other folks are. And I'm even taking a risk in talking to you, for example. Some of my healthcare providers would never admit that they had an interest in this topic, let alone that they have taken a psychedelic substance themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, we have this huge problem in medicine. This is a bit of a digression, but it is relevant here. A lot of healthcare providers have substance use disorder. A lot of healthcare providers have alcohol use disorder and a variety of other ailments that they don't seek out help for. Because you seek out help, there's a record, you've got a black eye, and your license comes under review, and you could lose your whole livelihood. So healthcare providers are some of the sickest people that I know.
Wow.
Because they have to stuff it, they have to hide it. It's part of our training that a lot of the vulnerability gets beaten out of us as we are becoming doctors. And so by the time a doctor actually admits, I need help, they're really, really, really deeply in need of help because they've blown past all of the warning signs on the way to crisis mode. So, for instance, I was just in Mexico where I was working with Ibogaine, and a shocking number of our patients who are coming for treatment were healthcare providers.
And I'm assuming with some form of addiction. It seems to
Yes.
be. Okay.
Opioid addiction.
And are they feeling that they can go down there and it's anonymous, like it's another country, I can just do what the work I need to do? Yeah.
Yeah. But if they were to go seek out treatment in the United States, wherever they get treated in the United States, the healthcare provider there is under their license obligation to report their colleagues.
And there's no Ibogaine above board in the States anyway. Yeah. And it maybe works for them.
Yeah. So to answer your question on, how to get doctors and healthcare providers to come around to this is it's tricky. Not every healthcare provider is going to relate to this on a personal level. They may relate to it more on an academic, intellectual level. Every healthcare provider is going to agree with you that antidepressant medications don't help everybody, and that we are running out of tools, and that more and more people are having issues with mental health than we can help, and that we need more tools. So whether someone can personally resonate with the importance of a mystical experience or not, doctors are opening their minds. There's also this situation where, doctors of all people hate looking stupid, and they hate looking like they don't know something, right? We all have huge ego problems. I'm just going to say right now, for the record, nobody goes into medicine for 100% altruistic reasons. But
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of some doctors. I'm like, yeah, of course. Like doctors love being doctors,
Yes. We really, it's like, congratulations, you're a doctor. You can now belittle anyone that you like. But Yeah, what was I starting to say here? But doctors really don't like it either when their patients come in, patient after patient after patient, and they're like, "Hey, I heard about this on Joe Rogan."
Yeah, well, that's
You
like
know,
you call your financial person, you're like, where? How can I make money on Bitcoin? And they're just
you're right.
like, it's
You got to
similar.
know about the thing.
Well, and everyone it is
Yeah.
bubbling up the psychedelic renaissance of where yes, it's been around in the underground, but it's much more in the above ground. So
Yes.
people are looking for
Yeah.
information, answers, and it's just interesting how different parties fit into that pie. And I would think as you
Hmm.
get closer and closer to the experience, like a facilitator, let's call it, I think they should have some experience with the medicine, or maybe it's okay for them to be on a microdose or some kind of dose, an
Right.
empathetic experience. There could be legitimate reasons for that sort of break the model we have
Mm,
medically, because that would not be how you
yeah.
do anything else in the medical system.
Sure. No, not at all. And I will say I do need to go on record here. I have a very unpopular opinion. This definitely gets me some like eyebrow raises when I say this at medical conferences. I don't think that you have to have taken psychedelics yourself to be a good practitioner. But I do think that one's patients, how do I want to put this? Your patients will and your clients will only go as deep as you have. And there are many roads to get there. There are many, many roads to get to depth. And the road that a practitioner takes doesn't have to necessarily be the same road that their patients take. But I do think that having a depth of experience for one's own self, psychospiritually, mystically, however you want to phrase it, yeah, I think it does make people better practitioners.
I like how you put that, and I actually thought you said there's many roads that lead to death instead of
Oh, that
depth.
too.
And I was like, that's so interesting. And that's a cool way. But then I started thinking about that, like all the roads that lead to death. And so the choices and paths that we can take,
Hmm.
and that there are many. But in some ways, it's a kind of vulnerability that you're
Yeah,
speaking to,
absolutely.
and that's really like, are you willing to bring that human element to the table? Because these states that you can get to potentially they're so vulnerable and
Yeah,
tender, and so that's not to say it doesn't take a form of just compassion that's open to anybody. Really, you're right.
right.
You don't really need to know anything. It's just about a kind of showing up and
Hmm.
an openness to the experience. But so what are you finding as you are working with like harm reduction approach, and you're trying to consult with people, like what are some of the things that are coming up, and what are the pitfalls that you feel like we're kind of missing as this whole thing is starting to get pieced together in a public way?
Oh my gosh. Where do I start?
I mean,
Well, I was,
pick something. I mean, a lot of the listeners, I
yeah,
think, they know a lot about the basics of what's going on and
sure.
probably have some experience or not. But I mean, we don't need to start with the like why psilocybin's good for you, or why it could
Right.
help, or what's
Yeah.
going on in the scene. I think it's like, let's get into the weeds and
Let's get in the
talk
weeds.
about
Yeah.
what's emerging.
Well, one big concern I have that I'm actually planning to present on this fall at a conference is this polarity that has been created between psychedelic work and pharmacology. And I think as guilty as the conventional medical model has been in rolling its eyes at psychedelic medicine, I think a lot of people in the psychedelic world are equally guilty of dismissing the potential therapeutic value of pharmaceutical medication. And as someone who is trained in both systems, I do prescribe pharmaceutical medications. I prescribe also botanicals and nutraceuticals. And I believe in the value of psychedelics. What I have found is that there is a place for all of it. And what works well for one person might not work well for another. And you don't have to pick just one system. So I'm consulting with patients and with clients who are pulling actually from all three systems. One patient in particular is doing fantastic on a combination of pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is a form of B6, a low dose of Cymbalta, and journeying with psilocybin 1 to 2 times a year. And that has been her pathway to recovery. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Hmm.
And what I really see happening in the psychedelic world is, first of all, everyone's saying you have to get off of your psych meds to do psychedelics, which is not sometimes true, not necessarily. It depends on the psychedelic. You know, you definitely have to get off your psych meds before you do ayahuasca, for
Right.
example. But not to do ketamine. And very often people can stay on their meds. Depends on the meds and the dose and whatnot, to do psilocybin and various other medicines. And, you know, also what I see happening in the psychedelic world is people kind of rolling their eyes at like, oh, you know, you take fluoxetine, which is Prozac, every day. Oh, what a crutch. And then that person goes and smokes weed 3 times a day.
Yeah, or drinks coffee every morning or a glass of wine at night. It's like, we're
What
chemical
do you think you're
systems.
doing?
We
Yeah.
really, I mean, that's all we are. Even our dopamine, oxytocin, going on a run, listening to interesting music, it's all chemical reactions creating our human experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, and the pathway back to health and health maintenance, you know, I'm kind of this mentality. I used to really be on my high horse, especially since I chose to do naturopathic medicine, like, oh, conventional medicine, I mean, it has its place, but whatever. No, it all has its place. And for different folks, different things are going to work to help them maintain a life experience that helps them have the most meaningful human experience, the most rewarding human experience that they can have.
When I broke my arm 3 times, every time I was pretty damn grateful for like the guys and gals who know how to get in there and use the screw gun, and we're good at that. But there were times in my life where, as an adolescent, I remember like being really depressed and being so young and not knowing anything about anything. My parents just kind of like, what do we do? And we go to the doctor. And never once being like tested for my vitamin D level or asked what my diet is or anything like that. Just kind of just like, wow, did you have any traumas, you know? Or I guess not, I don't know. We just can't figure out why you're struggling. Oh, you live in Oregon and it's, you know, it's
where the sun doesn't shine.
My vitamin D could have been in the toilet, you know, and like, so, you know, I also think about diet and just, you know, what you input into your body on all levels, energetically and physically, and how little credence that is given from the typical medical system when you're trying to look at a holistic picture of how you feel and your wellness. And the psychedelic experience is no panacea, but it can sometimes show you and help you work through traumas, repressed memories, physical trauma, perhaps even latent things that need to come out, particularly with the right guidance. Yet we often don't look at just things like diet. And I know with naturopathic medicine, it's huge, you know, even for the psychedelic experience, when people are like, I really want all this stuff from it. It's like, okay, how are you supporting your system of your body and your daily?
And that's something that we see in individuals who microdose is they tend to gravitate toward wanting to eat healthier and exercise more. It just sort of happens on its own. It's one of the ways in which psychedelic substance helps push the person back into a place of equilibrium.
That's interesting.
Junk food doesn't taste as good and healthy food tastes better and cigarettes are kind of gross.
I wonder if we'll get to a place in the future where we view microdoses as like a vitamin. Like it's like, you know, like taking a microdose of LSD or something is considered like, oh, that's way healthier than coffee every day. Or like, oh, that's just pure benefits, you know, the sub-perceptual, just like, you know, I get stuff done. And it's also maybe bled into some other things in my life. You'll never know if it's a one-to-one relationship. But you think about like the way coffee and the revolution it did in the Industrial Revolution and really building this whole country and how we've built our country largely around, you know, stimulant. I'm just curious, like, where that could go if, like, these other drugs, like psilocybin, microdosing, or others, became not just accepted but respected, recommended.
Sure. Well, and to that point, Krishna, is it wouldn't be everyone do this all the time, right? Like, not everyone drinks coffee, and not everyone needs to take vitamin A, right?
There you go.
Let's just add this to the toolkit of reasonable options that one can turn to for different situations.
So you were talking about like pharmaceuticals and as opposed to like a plant-based approach is called that, even though the division, if you think about it on a chemical level, there really isn't much of one. But that is something that's coming up. Like some of these companies, whether it's Compass Pathways, or there are others that are essentially pharmaceutical companies, or there's pharmaceutical arms that are working to produce the psilocybin. Some patent discussions that are like pretty sticky about like
Yeah.
patenting things about a journey, or let alone the medicine. Um,
hmm
what are you coming across as like things like Measure 109 in Oregon are coming on board, and some of the things maybe that you're looking out for?
You know, I'm not a corporation. I'm not a corporate minded person. I'm a doctor. I'm a healer. I'm here to heal people. I'm just keeping my head in that game. And you know, you can patent things about an experience. Okay, fine. Good luck enforcing that. You know,
Yeah, or
people
good
want
luck
this
doing
medicine.
it. Yeah.
You know, and that's fine. And you know, patents expire also. And it's like, okay, you patented, like, you know, Bikram's yoga. That's Bikram did not invent hot yoga, right? He took a series of moves and put them in a particular order and patented them. You do those same moves in a different order, you can call it something else.
Yeah.
So, you know, in a way, I'm actually very grateful to these interests that are spending lots and lots and lots of money to take out these patents, because a lot of them are funding research and a lot of them are normalizing this work. And that benefits all of us. So, like, for example, I'm grateful to Johnson & Johnson for doing all of those studies on esketamine. And now we have the drug Spravato. Do I use Spravato with my patients? Heck no. I see absolutely no reason to use Spravato when I can get generic ketamine for pennies in
Yeah.
comparison. But their research helped me help my patients. And I learned from their research, and it made me a better practitioner. And you know what? They're going to make their money back. And that's for them to eat 5 grams of mushrooms and figure out if they feel good about that or not. That's not my boat to row. You know, I
Yeah.
can just focus on myself and my patients, and you know, I sleep well at night.
Let me ask you about ketamine for a second. I've had some experience therapeutically with it, and it's been really beneficial for myself with anxiety reduction, I guess, and depression too. And I've been trying to know if like if there is any research out there aside from just what I hear in my own experience about like how much people tend to need to take. Like, is it like 4 sessions or 3 to 6 within X number of weeks, and then it seems to have a benefit for months, or is it really just all over the place for different people?
Well, you may be asking the wrong person, because I'm an advocate for individualized medicine. So I do different things for different people. A lot of what the literature is around is what's called the Diamond and McShane model, which is doing ketamine intravenously, where you infuse
Mm.
0.5 milligram of ketamine per kilogram of the patient's body weight, infused over 40 minutes. And that was not developed as this, wow, this is the way to do ketamine. That was just copied from the chemotherapy model as an efficient way
Interesting.
to run a practice, because then you can schedule the appointments on the hour. And then this thought of, you know, doing 6 treatments in a cluster of 2 weeks, that was borrowed from, you know, electroconvulsive therapy. That was just, let's copy this model and see if this works. Personally, the doing intravenous ketamine with folks at a dose of 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight, I do think it works. It's my least favorite way to do ketamine with folks. I think 6 treatments in 2 weeks is a heck of a lot of ketamine to put into somebody. Some folks need it. Some folks do well with it. But to copy and paste this to every single person who wants to do ketamine, I think is misguided.
What's your favorite method?
Depends on what the person needs.
Oh, you don't. Okay, there is no favorite.
So
I
yeah, you
gotcha.
know. So,
Uh,
but I will say, you know, if we're talking about using a needle, like, just do an intramuscular injection. Like, why does this needle have to be in this person's arm?
it's strong. Yeah, that's
Or
I had that
just
once and I was blown
yeah,
away.
yeah. But you know, also, you know, what I do with my patients is I do needle free. There's never a needle, almost never. Uh,
Mm.
there's you can insufflate it, which is a nice way of saying snorting.
Mm.
You can get it compounded as a nasal spray. You can put
What's
it
that
under
called?
the insufflating.
Insufflate. Oh, I gotta
Insufflate,
remember
yes.
that.
That's a
Okay.
classy way of saying snorting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Insufflate.
you can even do ketamine rectally. You can have it compounded as rectal
Wow.
suppositories. Yeah.
I imagine
Um,
that could work. Okay.
it absolutely works. And the beautiful thing with ketamine is I once actually interviewed Raquel Bennett, who's kind of the ketamine guru. And I was like, so which way? And she's like, they all work. And I really found that to be true. It all works. But you work with the patient. Is this someone who has a history of IV drug use? Why
Right.
does there need to be a needle involved? Is this someone who has a history of abusing cocaine? Okay, then we're not going to do the insufflation route. And then there's the dose range. Is this someone who's ready to do a psychedelic exploration? If so,
Right.
then you crank it up. Half a meg per kg is not going to get them there. Other patients, I have them microdosing ketamine. They take it every day as they would like a Prozac or Cymbalta or one of those other meds, and they do great with it.
So they're really having to sort of pay attention to how they feel, and that's the real litmus
Yeah.
test about what's working for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we look at with ketamine is, as with all of these therapies, is if you want to run an efficient business, then you just keep giving people ketamine, right? But if you want to improve the mileage that the person gets out of that treatment, there's nothing like pairing ketamine with therapy. The two just go together like chocolate and peanut butter. They just
Do you
work so
mean
well together.
therapy in the actual moment or the session where you're receiving the ketamine, or as an integration sessions post ketamine?
It depends on the dose of the ketamine. So if you're giving someone if you're putting someone in a K-hole and giving them a psychedelic trip, they can't talk. You're not going to have an effective therapy session there. But their neuroplasticity, their ability to learn and unlearn, is going to be there for 48 hours after that treatment. So to get somebody back into the office to see their therapist within a day or two after their ketamine trip, they may have breakthroughs in therapy that they might not have had before. But you gotta get it in that window. The other option is to dose it lower, where the person kind of feels relaxed, like as if they drank a couple glasses of wine, and it kind of drops some of the guarding. And
Yeah.
then you can kind of get in there. They can still talk, they can still sit up in the chair, or maybe they're leaning back a little bit. But they can still engage in a conversation, but they're a little bit, there's less of the shame layer there. There's less of the guarding there, and you can go deeper with them.
Well, I
And
think
then
this.
group therapy works too in that context.
Yeah, and I think this is relevant too, most likely to other forms of psychedelic therapy as they come online in the years, like
Mm-hmm.
psilocybin, perhaps. It's like it'd be interesting to know if there's that same kind of neuroplastic window,
Mm-hmm.
even for yourself to kind of really pay attention to like this really ripe time for integration, exploring, or whatever it is that your practices you're using, free writing or whatnot, to
Mm-hmm.
dig in there. Because I think in the session itself, like let's say they go really deep, but there's that kind of those hours, those golden hours as they're coming out and coming back, very receptive. It'd be nice if we had as part of like normal practice that those elements of ritual and
Yeah.
ceremonies, a little bit of that reverence and basic protocol. Of course, I'm very biased to what music can do inside that experience,
Mm-hmm.
but that's something I've seen a bit as an oversight in some of these ketamine businesses. They're very focused on administering the ketamine, as you said, and like, hey, it
Yeah.
has these scientific benefits. Let's just get it out there. But it's like, but how can we hold people through these states when sometimes, as you said, like K-holes or whatever you want to call it, very
Mm-hmm.
deep, very vulnerable, some real stuff can come up. It can be very destabilizing.
Sure.
And it's important to kind of like prepare for that in a sense as a provider.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is you don't have to do it all yourself as a provider. So, for example, a lot of my colleagues in the medical community, they're not going to make good facilitators. They don't know the first thing about therapy, and that's okay. They don't need to go drop everything they're doing and do a bunch of trainings if they don't feel like that path is calling to them. They can still prescribe the medicine and then tell the patient, okay, I'm prescribing this medicine to you. This anesthesiologist is going to administer it at the ketamine mill down the street. And I'm referring you to this therapist. And I want you to see this therapist within 48 hours of your infusions. And you really don't have to do all of the pieces yourself as a provider. And I will say I do counseling in my practice,
Hmm.
but I'm not a master's level counseling psychologists. I know my limitations, and I refer out all the time. I refer people out all the time. And unfortunately, as long as a lot of this work remains underground or illegal, it becomes a lot more challenging to create a cohesive care team for a person. And that's another way in which, from a harm reduction standpoint, we've got to legalize this stuff. Because in the case of ketamine, if you want to get a ketamine infusion, depends on where you go. It can be anywhere from $200 to $1,000 per treatment.
Right.
What's going to stop someone from buying ketamine and snorting it in their living room? It's a lot cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the average muggle, they're like, how do I get it? But
right.
Even people I know who aren't, they're pretty resourced and they're still like, how do I get it?
Right.
But you're right. It's not an expensive medicine in itself. As you pointed out, it's generic. And so that disparity in price is a bit troubling because I feel like access is a big part of this. And it'd really be great if there's just ways to open this up to all walks of people, especially considering that the cost of the medicine itself is not high.
No. Ketamine's dirt cheap and mushrooms grow out of the ground.
Yeah, those are facts. Yeah. So as you're doing this, you said that you were taking a risk by talking about this, and I understand what some of those aspects are, but at the same time, on the other side of that coin, there's so much energy and momentum. It seems like you're choosing to put yourself out there to be ahead of the curve and to like fill a niche. And so tell me a bit about that friction, if there is any, for you between being ahead, but also, ahead of our skis, but also wanting to be part of that vanguard.
Right. Well, I will say I'm no stranger to having people think that what I do is weird. I went into a very niche, tiny branch of medicine that is, the AMA is trying to choke out. But there's this like little stronghold of, naturopathic medical schools that refuse to die. And so, I'm used to people rolling their eyes at me when I say things. And then 5 years later, they say it as if it's gospel themselves. Like, hey, delayed cord clamping is a good idea after a baby is born. Or, hey, the kinds of microbes that are in the gut can influence your brain health. And I'm like, people roll their eyes. And then 5 years later, I'm at a conventional medical conference and they're talking about how important the microbiome is on mental health. And I'm like, naturopaths have been saying this for decades, folks. So I'm no stranger to being on, what some people might call being a quack. For me, I call it being an early adopter. That's not new to me. So I see myself as being, and this is yet another way in which I'm an early adopter. This is just like probiotics. This is just like delayed cord clamping. It's just going to be a matter of time before people roll their eyes and realize this is obvious. And, and as with any position in which someone's an early adopter or pioneer, there's going to be risk involved and not everyone's going to get it. And that's unfortunately the cost of doing business. And so to the best of my ability, I try to walk that as gracefully with as much patience as I can. I'm definitely not interested in poking the bear. Some people are self-righteous or intentionally antagonistic. And that's, that's not me. I'm a healer. I'm here to help people. The planet is really, really hurting right now. And I see a way for me to make some pretty meaningful contribution here to alleviating some of the human suffering. And, I'm trying to do it in ways that don't get me thrown in jail or lose my medical license. So I think I'm walking it pretty well, not breaking any laws. But, some feathers are getting ruffled.
Are there some other things you're seeing right now that you're you put that in that bucket that in 5 years they would be more accepted, but right now they're not, or that they're sort of getting poo-pooed?
I mean, I hope that we come around to the importance of nutrition. My goodness.
That's been, I mean, the funny thing about that is like, there's so many different opinions. Like, we go through all these different like fads of information from the low fat to, I mean, it just goes on and on. So I think some people throw up their hands and are just like, who knows, and then the food pyramid. And the Farm
Yeah.
Bill. It goes, it's a deep hole if you get into
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah. And now we're subsidizing, like, what are the foods? Corn and soy and wheat. Like, seriously? Those are
Yeah.
the foods we're subsidizing?
Yeah.
Like, yikes. Okay. But yeah, and we do need to address this alarming growth of autoimmune diseases, of allergic conditions, and of autism spectrum disorder. Like, are we going to do anything about this, folks? Or are we just
What
is
can we
this is
do?
our new
I mean,
this is our new normal, right?
well, maybe I'm imagining it's disparate causes, so it's sort of probably challenging to address. I mean, I've heard things
Yeah.
like the more you protect ourselves, maybe with allergies, for instance, the worse it can
Hmm.
get as you're getting older. But that's an interesting subject. I don't know if you're willing to hop into that at all.
That's a whole
But
other rabbit hole.
yeah, it's fascinating. Well, autoimmune in
It is.
general, I think, because if I correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some kind of autoimmune response in relationship to COVID, and
There may be. Yeah.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
that's interesting. And
Right.
and in general, if you think about autoimmune and also its relationship to the psychological element,
Hmm.
and pain in general,
Hmm.
and disease, and that role it plays, it is sort of all tying together. And in which case, dealing with psychological trauma, repressed emotions, and how the psychedelics can particularly help with that, sometimes in therapeutic
Hmm.
settings, could be a real key, perhaps, to unlock some of these
Potentially.
other ailments.
I think that if there is a psycho-spiritual layer to a physical ailment, I do think that psychedelics can absolutely help. Some ailments are not super informed by, psychology or emotions. Sometimes it's you just got a piece of glass in your foot, you know? Psilocybin's not going to help get it out. You need a pair of tweezers to pull them out, right? But yeah, as you said, Krishna, a lot of ailments do. They do have that psycho-spiritual layer, and this medicine may very well help with that. And that includes physical ailments and autoimmune diseases and chronic diseases that have no name, where the person's been to the Mayo Clinic and a million other places and no one can tell them what's wrong.
Yeah, you think about the placebo effect.
Right.
It's a real thing. It's quite powerful, like what we can sort of
Yeah.
perceive and what happens in our lives and our bodies.
Yeah. Like, fancy that. Our minds can change outcomes for us and others. Like, wow, lo and behold.
Yeah, we say the placebo effect in studies. We sort of assume that means like, oh, that's the stuff that was like didn't matter or was random. It's like in
Right.
some ways it shows it's this other very powerful drug in a way. I mean,
Yeah, that's totally free and
yeah,
environmentally sustainable with no
yeah.
side effects.
Well, have there been, if you're willing to talk about it, any personal experiences for you that sort of propelled you to take these leaps, or even to like dedicate yourself in this way, or take the risks that you're speaking to?
Well, I will say that reading about something is one thing, and seeing it work for yourself is quite another. And at a certain point, seeing this medicine work once, twice, three times, at a certain point, there's just a tipping point where, like, you just drink the Kool-Aid and you're in. You know?
It's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the remarkable outcomes. I am kind of talking biomedically here. The remarkable clinical outcomes that I have seen have piqued my interest in this work. And it's by no means the only thing that I do. Um, and I will say also, to be clear, people consult me from all over the world and they say, I'm thinking about doing psychedelics. What do you think? And then I spend an hour with them. We talk about their medical history, their goals, their
Yeah.
family history. What have they tried? What have they not tried? And I don't know, I'm making up a number, maybe 25% of the time I tell the person, I don't think that you should do psychedelics. I don't think that this is what you need for this ailment at this time in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I even say, I think this would harm you based on what you've got going on. So, I feel like I say this every time I talk to anybody and it's being recorded, but one of my favorite sayings is, to everything there is a season. And, psychedelics have a season, and that season has been talked about in hushed tones for a very long time. But now it's here. The season's here and it's in bloom. It's like, are you going to smell the roses or are you going to not smell the roses? I would recommend smelling them because they smell like heaven. They're absolutely delightful and they're here. So, yeah.
What are you both hopeful for, either personally, it could be broader than just this subject, or within this field, but also watchful for?
I'm hopeful that people are going to start loving themselves more meaningfully and taking care of one another more consistently. And I think that would solve a lot of the pain and suffering that's on this planet. Now, I've got no illusions. I don't think that, we're going to have the end of wars and famines and genocides anytime soon. I just don't. Suffering is part of being alive. But I hope that we can have less of it, less frequently, less intensity of it. And, what I'm watchful for in the world of psychedelics is greed. There's a lot of greed. And it's not just in psychedelics, it's in every industry. It's particularly disheartening in this one, but it is everywhere. And I will say, typically, the people that I have seen, kind of rewinding maybe a decade or two, for example, in cannabis, a lot of the people who got busted in cannabis were the ones who got greedy. And I just hope that people that are doing this are doing it with an eye on a virtuous reason.
And it's going to be part of the picture because it's part of the human experience too, greed. And we're inside this capitalistic system that on one hand is the driver, and the other hand can be the poison.
Yeah.
But it's in it. And so
it's the gas and the brakes, right? Yeah.
Right. It's sort of what's making all these companies and everyone be like, let's go fast. I'm sure there's a part of, I know some of these folks, and some of them absolutely is like, they really like, let's go fast because I think we can now, and it's needed. But yeah, there's that other side of how the money could potentially corrupt for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll have to keep an eye on that, but it's going to be part of it. It is.
Yeah, it is. And the money, I will say, the money makes it possible too. It does let it go bigger, faster, and reach more people.
Well, and I hope it does reach more people. I mean that more just like the door is open for anyone who's interested, not just people who can afford it. And that is a little bit, that's inside this bigger system of our medical system where it's like, the whole thing, it's like access is still part of that and has been for a very long time. And that's still something we need to work on.
Huge. Yeah, as it turns out, we need a single payer system. But there I go saying racy things.
Well, the fact that that's racy, come on, that's a lot of people want that, even to have the option, to say like you could join into that we don't even have that right now.
In addition to being a patient, I'm also a doctor. And I will say nobody likes our system.
Yeah.
Doctors hate it as much as the patients do. Doctors don't like having to conduct a 7-minute visit. It doesn't work for anyone.
Yeah, it's true. It just sort of gets into our larger senses of time. And in some ways, psychedelic therapy breaks the system a little bit because it takes a long time. Even ketamine, we're talking hours, really, realistically, from start to finish.
Well, the patient's tying up your room for an hour and a half.
At least, yeah. And you get into psilocybin, you're looking at most of the day, and LSD, ibogaine, you're into like day 2, so, or more, ayahuasca. So they do sort of, it is the kryptonite of the hyperspeed system in that it's like, look, sometimes good things come to those who wait, but that doesn't fit into like the billable minutes in the same way. And that's when things get very expensive.
No. Well, that's when you need volume. That's when you need to get a big clinic where you can run 20 rooms at a time, and then you hire some mid-levels, not physicians, right? to run it, and all the stuff that's that's not what I was put on this earth to do. Someone else was put on this earth to crunch those numbers, and bless them for it.
Community acupuncture in Portland that started there
Sure.
in the recliners, and that was their model that's really blossomed. It's been around for a long time now, and sliding scale. I think there's something there, probably certainly with ketamine. You could probably go in that direction. My partner is a ketamine therapist here in Boise, but the way she does it, it's groups, small groups, and so that already keeps the cost down. And
absolutely,
no one was doing that here, but it seems to be there's that added benefit of sort of that group connection and a small sharing circle. And
well, and one thing that we're seeing in Oregon, which just passed ballot measure 110, which legalized psilocybin assisted therapy. The state now has 2 years to figure out how they're actually going to administer this, but one of the stipulations of the ballot measure is to be a psilocybin therapist, you do not have to already have a certificate or a license. You don't have to be a psychotherapist. You don't have to be a doctor to facilitate a psilocybin experience for someone. And that is inherently going to make it more affordable. That's inherently going to put more providers out there in the field. And it's going to make it more accessible, therefore. Now, that was a hotly contended point about the ballot measure. Medical community did not like that.
Is Measure 110 the legalization of certain drugs, and 109 is psilocybin, or they both have that kind of language? Just for my own.
109 was legalization of psilocybin assisted therapy.
Yeah.
And then 110 was decrim of most substances for personal use amounts only. So it's not legalization, it's decrim. So if you get caught with, say, 5 grams of psilocybin for personal use, you get a slap on the wrist, you get fined $100, or you have to take a class.
Yeah. And I think also, but they are saying that you have to have some kind of training that the state approves, so to speak, to be a facilitator. So you might be a high school graduate, which is awesome. You don't have to be like you said, it opens up who could take that training.
Right. But yeah, you do have to take a training.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And I will be an instructor in one of the programs, which I'm
Have you guys, I'm assuming because it's a year and a half away, it's in the early stages of developing right now.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah. There's kind of, as Tom Eckert, who wrote the ballot measure with his wife, Shuri, as Tom says, we're building the plane as it's going down the runway. But we are building it.
Do you think there'll be are there unlimited training programs, or is it going to be limited?
I don't know. I believe that they are going to create certain stipulations for what the training programs have to include, and then the programs have to apply to be approved by the Oregon Health Authority. But then, from there, I anticipate that there will be several, and that they'll all be a little different, and that people who want to get the training will hopefully be able to access it. I know that racial equity and equity in other respects is very, very high on the priority list for this. So hopefully we will get some more diversity in this industry and who is able to access psilocybin therapy and the training.
For sure.
In the future, yeah.
Fascinating times. I mean, a lot of eyes are going to be on how that pans out, and probably used as a model in a similar way to when cannabis became recreational in other states. Were like, well, how'd they do it? And
Totally.
Well, I hope too that in the experience itself, there's some attention paid to the music, and
I hope so too.
And the role of sort of just protocol or ceremony, or just that sort of these elements that can really inform the journey itself. My experience is mostly in how you guide that journey. And to me, and historically as well, music's becomes the ceremony. It becomes the experience.
It's the wind in the sails. It's huge.
It's huge. And so it's not an afterthought for me. It's sort of like, it's not to say there's one way at all, but it's sort of like this should be a part of the conversation to really help people have the most positive and powerful experiences.
Yeah. In my course, I actually have a mini experiential module where I obviously can't mail everyone LSD all over the world, but we just experience some of the other elements of a psychedelic session. And a part of that is laying with eye shades on and listening to a curated music playlist. And it's amazing how just doing that, setting an intention, laying down, listening to music and breathing, how much can shift and how much can come up for a person just from doing that. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
the medicine is just part of the medicine.
Yeah, the psychedelics are amplifiers. I mean, doing breath work is
Oh my gosh,
powerful. So you breathe
powerful.
breathe a little harder, and it's like, yeah, it'll go places quick,
Yes, it will.
and very deep emotional places and
Mm-hmm.
visual places too, for many.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing a little bit about your experience on the ground and your own practice. And it's just sort of great to talk to folks who are going through it in their own way as we go through these changing liminal times. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It was really my pleasure. And I would love to offer your listeners a discount on my course if that seems appropriate.
Yeah, where can they find you? This would be a great time.
Okay, so the website is scienceofpsychedelics.com. And Krishna, what do you want your coupon code to be?
You could just make it East Forest, one word, because that's the same as the handle for like Instagram stuff. It's easy to remember.
Okay, well,
I mean, whatever you want it to be. I don't care.
No,
it could be like Machine Elves. It could be
no. East Forest. I can remember that, and that will get anyone that applies that code 20% off on the course.
All right.
Continuing medical education and continuing education are also available for practitioners. So this is so relevant right now that the medical community is finally acknowledging it and offering professional credit for training in psychedelics.
Oh yeah, I saw that on your site. I do think that's, sort of interesting, providing that sort of education for providers and people in the field. That's a big part of it.
Huge. Yeah. But everyone's welcome to join. You don't have to have any fancy initials after your name to join us.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Erica, for coming on the show. It's always wonderful to dive into this rapidly changing landscape. Check out her website. The link is in the show notes there. But it is, just so I can tell you it is Erica, Erica, Zelfand, Zelfand.com. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Sweetly Down, and it features the amazing sweet talents of Sheila Bringy on the Bansuri flute. So grateful for her talents back on this song and joining up for another recording. I'm always amazed by what she can do. So that's from the Possible album, which is out everywhere that you listen to music now. And also, I just want to make a quick note, if you're still here, that I'm sorry that we were out, or it said we were out of some certain merchandise items like the perfume oils and certain vinyls. We're not out, and those inventories should be corrected soon. And so you should be able to purchase those items. And I really, really appreciate everyone who's able to re-up on your perfume oils, or getting the new Possible album, or Ram Dass vinyl, or Spores, whatever it is, among the other things we sell over there, because it's another way to help support this project and everything that we are up to. So thank you very much. All right, well, hope to see those who can make it in Denver and Salt Lake City in September, and more to come soon. But until then, and until next week, you guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do it with grace.